Have you noticed something strange about modern relationships? We have more ways to communicate with each other than at any other point in human history. We can message somebody instantly. We can see what they're doing, where they've been, what they've eaten, who they're with. We know when they're online. We can send photographs, videos, voice notes, emojis. We can maintain contact with hundreds, sometimes thousands of people without ever being in the same room. And yet, so many people feel lonely. Not necessarily alone, lonely. And those are two very different things. Because you can be surrounded by people and still feel as though nobody really knows you. You can have hundreds of friends on social media and nobody would actually call at 3 o'clock in the morning. You can message somebody every day and still have absolutely no idea what's really happening inside their life. And I think we've reached a very strange point in human evolution. We have become incredibly good at staying in contact and increasingly bad at connecting. So today, I want to explore why. Connection isn't the same as contact. One of the biggest mistakes we make is assuming that communication creates connection. It doesn't necessarily. Communication is simply the transfer of information. Connection is something much deeper. Connection requires presence, attention, curiosity, vulnerability, and perhaps most importantly, time. But modern communication hasn't been designed to remove almost all of those things. Think about how we communicate now. Someone sends you a message. You glance at it while you're doing something else. You send a quick reply, then another notification appears. You answer that. Then you look at something on social media. Then somebody sends you a photograph. Then you remember you haven't replied to somebody else. There is communication happening everywhere, but very little of it requires our complete attention. And human beings can feel that. We know when somebody is really listening to us. We know when somebody is waiting for their opportunity to speak. We also know when somebody is looking at their phone while we're talking. And we certainly know when somebody asks, "How are you?" but actually doesn't want the answer. The real connection requires us to temporarily stop being the centre of our own attention. And that's becoming increasingly difficult in a world constantly competing for that attention. We've created the illusion of intimacy. Social media has added another fascinating layer to this, because we know an extraordinary amount about people we actually don't know very well. You can know that somebody has gone on holiday. You can know they've gone for dinner. You can know that their child graduated. You can know that they've redecorated their kitchen. You can even know that they're having a difficult time. And because we know all these things about them, our brain can create a sense of familiarity. But familiarity isn't necessarily intimacy. Knowing about somebody isn't the same as knowing somebody. And I think that's an important distinction. Real intimacy isn't knowing what somebody had for dinner. It's knowing what frightens them, what embarrasses them, what they secretly worry about, what makes them feel safe, what they regret, what they hope for, what they don't tell everybody else. Those things require trust, and trust isn't built through information, it's built through experience, through hundreds of small interactions where somebody gradually learns, I can be myself with you. And perhaps that's one of the things we're missing. We're presenting ourselves rather than revealing ourselves. There's another psychological change happening. We're becoming increasingly conscious of how we appear to other people. For most of human history, you simply lived your life. Now, to some degree, we also publish our lives. And once you know you're being observed, something interesting happens. You start editing. Not necessarily deliberately, but you choose the photograph. You choose what to share. You choose what not to share. You choose the version of yourself that other people get to see. And gradually the difference between being yourself and presenting yourself can become blurred. That's not just happening online either. We do it socially. We learn which opinions are acceptable, which emotions make other people uncomfortable, which part of ourselves fit comfortably into the group, and which parts don't. So we edit, we soften, we perform, we become agreeable, and then something very strange happens. People may like us, but somewhere underneath, we still don't feel completely connected to them. Why? Because there's a quiet thought underneath it all. Would you still like me if you actually knew me? That's the problem with constantly adapting yourself to gain acceptance. You may eventually get the acceptance, but you never completely trust it, because you're not entirely sure what they've accepted. You, or the version of you gave them. We've become afraid of discomfort. Real relationships are uncomfortable sometimes. People misunderstand each other. They disappoint each other. They disagree. They say the wrong thing. They forget things. They get irritated. They've had bad days. That's what happens when two imperfect human beings spend enough time together. But increasingly, we seem to expect relationships to feel comfortable all the time. And when they don't, we're very quick to label them toxic, negative, problematic, red flag. Now, obviously, there are relationships that genuinely are unhealthy, and sometimes walking away is absolutely necessary. But ordinary human friction isn't automatically dysfunction. Sometimes it's two people discovering where each other's edges are. And historically, relationships had to survive quite a lot of that friction. Today, we have another option. We can disappear. We can unfollow, mute, block, ghost, leave the group, delete the conversation, and sometimes that's entirely appropriate. But if avoidance becomes our default response to discomfort, something important never develops. Repair. And repair is one of the foundations of intimacy. The moment after the misunderstanding, the conversation after the argument, the ability to say, I didn't understand what you meant. That hurt me. I got that wrong. I'm sorry. Can we start again? Those moments deepen relationships. Because trust isn't created by never having conflict. Trust is created by discovering that the relationship can survive conflict. We have more choice and less commitment. Modern life has also given us an extraordinary amount of choice. Dating apps are probably the most obvious example. Potentially thousands of people available with the movement of a thumb. But this psychology doesn't only affect romantic relationships, it affects friendships too. Communities, jobs, where we live, almost everything, and endless choice creates a very particular psychological problem. If there might always be something better available, why invest deeply in what you already have? This creates a very particular psychological. Why repair something when replacement appears so easy? Except human beings aren't products and meaningful relationships aren't discovered, fully formed. They're built. That's something I think we've forgotten. The deepest relationships in your life probably didn't become meaningful because you immediately discovered the perfect person. They became meaningful because you accumulated history together. You showed up again and again and again. You experienced things together. You learned each other's peculiarities. You saw each other at your best and at your worst. That's what creates depth, and depth cannot be downloaded. It cannot be swiped into existence. It requires time. We're losing the small moments. And here's something else I find fascinating. Some of the most important moments in relationships don't look important at all. Sitting around the kitchen table, driving somewhere together, having a cup of tea, walking the dog, waiting for a train, doing absolutely nothing particularly interesting. Those are often the moments when people start talking, really talking, because there's no agenda. Nobody has announced, right, we will have a meaningful conversation. It just happens. A silence appears. Somebody says something, and suddenly you're discussing something you never discussed before. But we've become very good at filling those empty spaces. The phone comes out, the TV goes on, we scroll, we consume, we distract ourselves. And when we remove those seemingly boring moments from relationships, we may also remove the space in which intimacy naturally develops. Sometimes connection happens precisely because nothing else is happening. We've had to risk being seen, and I think underneath all this lies something even deeper. Real connection is risky because to genuinely connect another human being, you eventually have to allow them to see something real. Not everything, not immediately, but something. You have to express an opinion they might disagree with, admit something that hurts you, tell somebody you miss them, say you need help, tell them you're frightened, admit you don't know. And every time we do that, there's a possibility that the other person won't respond the way we hope. That's vulnerability. And humans have always found vulnerability frightening. But now we have an extraordinary number of ways to avoid it while still maintaining the appearance of a connection. We can send an emoji instead of how we feel. We can like somebody's post instead of calling them. We can watch somebody's life from a distance instead of participating in it. We can have a dozen of conversations without ever saying anything particularly meaningful. So perhaps the problem isn't that we're less connected, perhaps we're simply becoming better at creating the appearance of connection without actually taking the emotional risks that real connection requires. So what do we do? I don't think the answer is abandoning technology. I'm certainly not going to tell you to throw your phone in the sea. Technology isn't the enemy, it's a tool. The question is whether the tool is helping our relationships or quietly replacing parts of them. So perhaps we start with something incredibly simple. Give people your full attention occasionally. Have conversations that aren't interrupted every 30 seconds. Ask a second question. If somebody says they're fine, occasionally ask, are you really? Tell somebody something real. Allow silence. Spend time with people without needing to document it. And perhaps most importantly, stop measuring the quality of your relationships by the quantity. Allow interactions. Someone you speak to twice a year may know you better than somebody who you message every single day. Because connection isn't measured in messages, it's measured in how safe you feel being yourself in somebody else's presence. And in closing, we are probably the most technologically connected generation that has ever existed. But technology solved the problem of distance. It never solved the problem of intimacy. And that's still our responsibility. Human connection has always required something technology cannot automate. Presence, patience, trust, time, and, most importantly, the courage to allow another person to see who we really are. So if your relationship sometimes feels strangely empty despite having people around you, perhaps the question isn't, why am I so disconnected? Perhaps a better question is, where in my life am I actually allowing myself to be known? Because there is a world of difference between being seen and being known. And maybe that's what we're really missing. I'm Sara Wheeler, and if you enjoy exploring the psychology behind modern life And while we think and feel and behave the way we do, please subscribe to my channel because you're not broken, you're human.